An international station for an international city. This is Radio 3. Money Talk.
Good morning, it's 8:03 in Hong Kong on Monday the 19th of September. Welcome to a new week of Money Talk on Radio 3. This is Peter Lewis with the business and finance headlines. Economic activity data for China in August came in mainly better than expected. The standouts number was retail sales, which rose 5.4% year-on-year, up from 2.7% in July, boosted by strength in the restaurant and catering sector, automobiles and consumer goods. Industrial production grew by 4.2% year-on-year in August, an improvement from 3.8% in July, but still weak by China's normal standards. The big disappointment in the data was housing. The numbers showed home prices have now declined every month in the past year, with the contraction worsening in August. Residential property sales continued their weakness, down over 30% year-on-year in the January to August period. Data from Hong Kong also shows weakness in the city's housing market worsening.
Money Talk on RTHK Radio 3.
Times 8:24 on the phone from Shanghai is independent economist Andy Sher. Morning to you, Andy.
Yeah, good morning, Peter.
Now, we were talking earlier about this data on the program from China in August. Let me ask you, first of all, your overall impression of the numbers. There were some bright spots in it, weren't there? But also some pretty ugly numbers as well, particularly in the property sector. What are your thoughts about how the economy is looking on the mainland at the moment after this data?
Well, I think that the COVID, the zero COVID really creates this volatility in data. That you have shutdowns, then lockdowns, then you have recovery, the bounce. So on the domestic side, you have this volatility that does not indicate a trend. That's what we saw in August. That the lockdown situation was better. So we have some recovery in domestic consumption. But we got lockdowns in September, so you would expect worse numbers. In particular, the Mid-Autumn Festival, the spending's down 60%. So you would expect a much worse September. But on the property side, it's a continuing situation. It's just recovery is not possible, I think. This is basically a big bubble popping, and it's hard landing. I don't see any way back, and it has broad implications for construction sector, for construction equipment sector, construction materials, and so forth. So it's going to be a drag on the economy for a long time to come.
So what does the government need to do? Because as you say, the property slump, it's a depression, really, isn't it? It's definitely getting worse there. What do you think the government should do to try and boost that?
Well, China needs restructuring. China hasn't reformed for 20 years since Premier Zhu Rongji did a round of reforms and took China into the WTO. Jim. It's been drifting ever since. It's just a lot of structural problems have been accumulating, but the government is unwilling to deal with these problems. In particular, is the imbalance between consumption and investment. Investment is too big. The second is that Chinese capital investment is disproportionate into manufacturing, into small cities, not very efficient. So, but also what the market wants is for China to become much more mega city led, because people like to live in big cities, and the big cities are more efficient. So you cut investment, boost the consumption, concentrate investment in developing mega cities, and just probably shut down a lot of small city governments. And so the China obviously will surge because the current per capita income is still relatively low, and Chinese people are very productive. But I think that politically it's very difficult. And why China hasn't reformed is because of political constraints. I think the Communist Party is uncomfortable with a consumption-driven society, which means private enterprise on the supply side. And a mega city-driven society, that means that a lot of people living in one place, and it's not easy for the Communist Party to control. So China is really running into political constraints.
It's also going to run into financial constraints, isn't it? Because local governments rely on the property market for the major source of their revenues. So they've got to sort of also lessen their dependence on selling land.
Yeah, I think that the local governments will become like kind of like we used to talk about zombie companies. In China we probably will be talking about zombie governments. You have all these governments basically, they are there and they cannot pay their employees.
But the problem is, even big property developers now are really suffering, aren't they? Like Country Garden, it's reported that its profits have completely collapsed. It said the market has slid rapidly into deep depression. Is the government going to have to bail out the whole sector here?
Yeah, I think the certainly top 100 companies, the sales down by about 70% or so. So this is a really hard landing. And the property sector has a really serious problems. It has never been cash positive. It runs on more and more debt. Now the music has stopped. It's very hard to see how they can survive.
So really, China's got to just redesign its whole economic model, hasn't it? Because it's been dependent too long for this enormous sector with so much of the country's wealth tied up on it. But it's going to be very difficult and long to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the right thing to do is to deal with the consequences of this bubble bursting and reform the economy and generate new sources of productivity and use these gains to pay for the cost, which the government doesn't want to do. The government basically is depending on exports. Chinese people still work hard, and as long as the global economy is standing, Chinese exports will keep going. So the domestic economy will become like in a zombie-like situation for many years.
Okay, Andy, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Andy Sher, Shanghai-based independent economist.
You're listening to Money Talk on RTHK Radio 3.